Hi, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Ourielle, and today we are going to discuss a little bit of a doozy, which is why summer knitting just feels like a flop, and why all the summer knitting advice that I've been getting on the internet, I just feel like doesn't freaking apply to me. And it might not apply to you either. Let's get into it. So I think there's a couple of reasons why summer knitting just doesn't feel like it hits. It doesn't have the same charm, it doesn't have the same charisma. It's just not as appealing as something like spring, fall, winter knitting. Like that stuff just hits different. I think summer is really the time when we shut down, and we are right in time for astrological summer. It's gonna be like June 21st, and I am like really trying to set myself up for success here. This is my third summer knitting, or my second summer, I can't really remember, but I've been knitting a few years and I have never, ever nailed down summer knitting. Like to this day, I think I've only knit 3 or 4 things for summer knitting. And when I sat down for this video, which y'all voted for, by the way, thank you so much for participating in these polls. They are super, super helpful. Members get access to polls and sometimes exclusive polls earlier, as well as a couple other perks. But I do, periodically send out some basically feelers to see what people want to watch, and this was your vote. So thank you so much everyone who participated. But yeah, like when I sat down to plan for this video, I realized not only do I have like general hot takes and feelings about summer knitting, I realized what I was doing wrong. And all of that was because I was influenced by our community online, and there's nothing wrong with it. I don't necessarily say this as a way to complain or to like bash people. I just have other thoughts I'd like to contribute. And if you find yourself not having like your knit mojo in the summertime, maybe it's because of similar reasons to myself. And so I just wanted to throw those into the ring. And if you have some summer knitting, go ahead and grab it. I cannot knit and talk at the same time because I don't have this scripted. So let's jump into it. Fundamentally, I think my thesis statement is that I was listening to too much knitting content and not necessarily thinking about my needs and my wants and taking a critical lens to that and applying it to my crafting, which is very unlike me, actually. If you know me and you're kind of like on this channel, you know that all I like to do is pontificate and navel gaze. And so, it's a little surprising that I let myself be influenced like that. But, this is like when people say, I would never be in a cult. I'm like so free thinking and independent, like it can never be me, right? I have been kind of setting myself up for failure in the sense that I'm watching all these people do summer knitting. I'm watching all these people put together gorgeous cues and lists and curations for summer knitting beautiful things, showing top after top after top. And, I'll put stuff on my list, I'll put things on my queue. And then at the end of every summer when fall comes around, I think, oh, like I never actually got to do any of those things. Why is that? And I have some fundamental gripes with what's going on, and I have some plans for how I can change some of those expectations that ultimately always make me feel guilty because they were just phrased wrong. I had just framed everything in the wrong way. So if you're in that same camp, hold on tight. Let's actually unpack some of this and see if you might relate to some of this stuff, and if you can also, like myself, reframe what our goals and aspirations are for summer knitting. Firstly, fundamentally, I think the problem is that summer knitting is just not going to be the same because of what you're doing with your construction and with your material. I think the be-all end-all blanket answer of, oh, summer knitting isn't fun, it's not satisfying because it's hot, and no one wants to knit with something that is hot because it's hot, and I want to be cold. Like, yes, I think that's definitely part of it. I don't think that's as big of an answer as open and closed, it's hot and therefore we don't like knitting. For me, that's not true because I will crochet, I will knit, I will do all kinds of stuff in the summer that includes wool and, materials that I use year round. The thing that I'm actually talking about. And realistically, oftentimes I'm knitting in the office, in doctors' offices, on public transit, in shopping malls and restaurants, cafes, whatever. Like most of those are climate controlled. And where I live, it's just really common for us to have AC. And so I'm not actually like all that hot unless I'm outside or in my house and I refuse to turn on the AC. But realistically, it's not like it's always so hot that I don't want to knit. I mean, obviously if I'm sitting in the car and like the car has just turned on and it's blazing hot because it's 95 degrees outside and my car is a metal box that's been like picking up heat for the last 6 hours that it's been sitting outside, I'm not gonna want to knit a wool sweater immediately. But that's not the case for like once the car cools down and like, yes, there's like sun on my lap, but there's also a breeze in my face and everything, like I'm happy to knit wool. I knit a lot of wool. I knit this like very recently and I'm wearing it now and it's summer. So, you know, I don't think that's necessarily the whole conversation. It's definitely part of it and that's fine, but I don't think we should let ourselves off the hook so easily by saying, oh, well, if you just change the fiber material to like something cooler, then your problems will be solved. Because I actually don't think that's the case. And I think that was the brainwashing. The first thing that I heard, be all end all, was that it's too hot for wool and that's the problem with summer knitting. I don't think that's true. And when I thought that I could just change my problem, if I could just like solve my problems by changing the material, that everything would be fixed. It set me up for failure because that wasn't the problem. It's not necessarily just that you can swap out wool for cotton and then, you know, Bob's your uncle, you can knit over the summer and there shouldn't be any issues. Fundamentally, I think the material that you're dealing with is not as forgiving as animal fibers. So with plant fibers, and specifically with the construction of summer garments that use said plant fibers, you're dealing with, I think, a lot more criteria for success than you are for winter knitting. And this is going to be for me, but in general, I find it really easy to kind of bookmark and favorite sweater patterns and, you know, blouse patterns or whatever for every other season besides spring, summer. And I think part of it is because wool is forgiving and sweaters are forgiving. You know, yes, of course, I'm picky. I'm a picky bitch. Like that's kind of the whole shtick on this channel. But I think the concern is when it comes to things like tops, sleeveless tops, summer tops, t-shirts, you know, I have to pay a lot more attention for details because your actual material is kind of fighting against you. Plant fibers like bamboo, like cotton, they want to drape and hang. And not only that, they kind of want to like drape and hang all sorts of out of shape over time, over years. And you see constantly, time and time again, people saying, I knit this tank top 2 years ago and it's already kind of looking a little blah, or like, oh, the strap's stretched out, but that's kind of expected because it's made of bamboo. Or I really like this, but you know, I need to go in and like fix this, you know, ribbing because the ribbing has kind of bowed out and it doesn't look as neat as it used to. Or in general, I can't get my ribbing to look neat because it's a plant fiber, yada, yada, yada. It just seems like the material itself is already kind of dealing with 1 foot out the door because you know that there's kind of a lifespan on your product already and it's kind of a ticking time bomb. And then on the other hand, when you're dealing with sweaters and drop shoulder construction and things that are just kind of big and loose and baggy, that merino or that wool can compensate for what might be loose structure because it has memory, it has give. You can block it out. You can kind of play with the shape by shrinking it a little bit or stretching it a little bit or whatever the thing might be for you to do some surgery. You can felt some stuff together. It's easier for you to do sweater surgery, for example, as opposed to like doing sweater surgery on like a cotton t-shirt. Like I've never heard of anyone going in and like successfully doing that kind of thing. For example, this is like a very, very simple problem where I just want plain summer t-shirts, plain summer tank tops, but I want them to have bust shaping and I want them to be an engaged style. Like all of a sudden that number goes from like 50,000 options down to like 100 options because it's just harder and less forgiving in the summertime. When you're dealing with simpler garments and especially closer fitting garments and smaller garments and, you know, just the kinds of stuff that people are wearing that are not as oversized and not as, you know, heavy and drapey or whatever, you're dealing with a kind of attention to detail that now requires some finesse and shaping that I'm just not seeing as much of. And so it's really hard to find examples of things that I know will stand the test of time. Even with patterns that are really, really rave reviewed, I realize that a lot of it is because we're dealing with body types and people who are not necessarily dealing with certain restrictions. So when we say stuff like, oh, this pattern works really well, but it has like no bust shaping, or the short rows, you know, like maybe there's no short rows, but it doesn't really bother them because they don't really have an issue with something riding up in the back. But the simple fact that bust shaping and cup shaping is not in like 90% of summer tops has literally made all those summer tops completely defunct for me, right? And the expectation for me is now that just because I hear 90 people raving about something and they're saying that this top is amazing, I had no problems making this top, I made it, you know, within 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, I can't take that as testimony because it's just not going to fit me properly. Like a prime example of this is the sabai, which everyone and their mother raves about. And all of these really popular designers that especially pop off in the summertime because they make all these beautiful little tank tops and stuff. none of them make anything for cup adjustment. And so even though I hear time after time again, I knit this, I loved it, I made this tank top, I loved it, it just like will not ever make sense for me because I cannot look normal wearing those tops. Like no matter what I do, it just will not look normal on me, or it like won't look the way that I think it will look based on other people's recommendations. And as soon as I stopped seeing like popularity and testimony as like the be all end all for what is like a reputable pattern, I realized, oh yeah, like that's gonna make my success go a lot higher, right? Like I knit a couple of tops and I just felt like they never fit me properly. I never liked wearing them. They just kind of felt frumpy and ugly on me. And it's because they just don't have the shaping that is required for me to look good in these summer tops. And it's because there's less give. When it comes to summer, there's less give. When it comes to plant fibers, there's less give. We just need to be more judicious about all of the little details because, you know, plant fibers are just like brutal. And on top of that, this is just me getting on a soapbox. I don't like the fact that they stretch out. I think, you know, the fact that it's so common for people to say that they knit something for 2-3 years and then it just stretched out and they need to either go back and fix it or they can't wear it anymore and so they need to make a new one, to me just makes this entirely unappealing on like a fundamental level. So yeah, the first thing is just like the material and the actual instructions themselves make summer knitting a challenge in and of itself. Related to that, I feel like there's a trap around aspiration and your fantasy self. Now, this is like a really, really common thing that we're talking about in the fashion and like psychology space, which is, you know, sometimes we do things for the version of ourselves that we imagine and not the version of ourselves that we actually are. Totally cool. I love like thinking about that. But on a very, very, very basic level, I think of body type as being a big problem here. So much of the summer knitting is about the posing and the location and, you know, the color and the yarn that they're using and maybe just like the general attractiveness of the model. Yeah, sure. Do I love the By the Sea book and all the beautiful knits that like took place by like the Nordic seaside? Of course, I think that's gorgeous. But most of us realize that we are not editorial models and like, we won't look the same. But for me, it really comes down to, again, body type. I'm curvy, I have a large bust, and like the whole like ratio thing where like you just can't use like typical measurements to do stuff with. And it is extremely frustrating. Yeah, and I do think for me, the aspiration is kind of like if I knit myself this shirt, maybe I can like knit away those curves or I can like knit away some of the problems that I have with fit. And I will never be able to knit myself a bra minimizing vest. Like that's just not a thing. But I do find myself in the trap of like looking at summer knitting and instead of seeing my actual body and self and my proportions and my short limbs and whatever in that garment, I don't know, there's like a short circuit behind like understanding that fantasy self isn't always super dramatic. It's not always something like, oh, I one day will be an artist who like lives in this town and I wear these colors and I have a life where I wake up and I go to the farmer's market. Like sometimes it's just as simple as like, I'll look good in this vest and maybe it will make my boobs look slightly smaller and I can have that chic look. You know, there's this whole conversation around how like having boobs just isn't chic. And, you know, that's a whole separate can of worms that I would love to get into in the future. But, you know, in the knitting world, it's very reinforced. It's very reinforced that like having busts, having a bust is just like not it. You know, Rachel is Knitting made a video titled "Do Knitting Designers Just Hate Boobs?" And I think that's like a very real discussion that I would love to like have. Rachel, if you want to talk about this on your podcast, like reach out to me because I agree. I think there's just something about like having a bustier chest that like we hate as knitting designers. Like we hate it. We hate it. Like there's no one who wants to make bust darts. There's no one who wants to make shaping. There's no one who wants to show in their pattern samples. And if we do, it's always like the frumpiest, almost like it is being accommodated, but it never looks good. I don't know. I just feel like I always want to knit in such a way that makes my chest look invisible. And it's, what is the word? Dysmorphia that only exists around knitting. Like I almost never have an issue with my chest being the size and shape that it is, outside of the fact that when I'm knitting, it is nothing but a hindrance. And it's never represented nicely. It never looks aspirational. And this is the kind of like small fantasy self that I find myself having to quiet. And this summer, I'm just gonna say like, no girl, if the thing doesn't look like it would flatter a larger bust, and if you don't see someone in the samples or someone in the Ravelry gallery page that did not make crazy modifications, it was just not made for you, or it wasn't made with you in mind, and that's okay. But knitting something that very clearly has no bust shaping, very clearly has no give for the bust area, no give for the waistline, like no, you know, like conversation or consideration for curviness, it's not going to magically look like that on you because like you guys are not the same. So for me, fantasy self is not just about location and like a level of wealth and beauty and unattainable like blah 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 that's like pie in the sky. It is as simple as like sometimes designers are not necessarily intending to exclude you from something, but they kind of are, and you need to be the one to realize that yeah, you're not being accommodated here. And so you need to make sure that whatever you're envisioning is actually realistic. The next one is that the common success wisdom around knitting implies something about summer style that I just like don't fuck with. Like I don't have that summer style. A lot of like plain linen t-shirts, plain cotton t-shirts, minimalist, light, breezy, little tops, you know, like tiny little tank tops. Everyone is knitting a tiny little tank top, a tiny tank top, a little t-shirt, something plain, something minimal, something simple. Like I'm always seeing simple t-shirts, which is like fine. Okay, a girl can have a simple t-shirt or two. I might want maybe 3, maybe 4, but I'm not necessarily looking for a ton of simple things. When you look at my winter knitting wardrobe, it's actually like almost no simple stuff. I don't actually have a very simple style. And when it comes to my commercial clothing, almost none of it is basics. Like I don't necessarily not have basics, but the bulk of my wardrobe is actually not basics. Most of my stuff is print, it's a dramatic color, it's a dramatic silhouette. There's something about it that is like actually quite interesting. Like most of my wardrobe in the summertime when I'm left to my own devices includes layers and cardigans and lace and strong graphics. And I like a level of intricacy and detail that is actually not represented all the time in summer knitting. Yes, I do think lace is really like shiny and beautiful and gorgeous in the summertime. And I think I'm just gonna have to bite the bullet and recognize that maybe this is just the time of year that I knit a ton of lace, because other than that, what I'm seeing in the zeitgeist and like what the recommendations are and what I want to knit are just like 2 entirely different things. I have tried to heed this advice around like just feeling compelled by a little t-shirt, a little striped top, a little tank top, a little off the shoulder thing, a little thing with a collar. Like I like that. I can appreciate it on its merit. 1, already 90% of it is gone because there's no bust shaping. So we've talked about that already. But 2, I think I'm tired of just assuming that that's the be all end all. I am over it. I have accepted that maybe my taste is just going to include a little bit more fussiness, and I'm either going to accept the cost of that fussiness because it's either going to be realistically smaller gauge or more construction detail, which I don't like doing. I'm not a process knitter. So either I'm going to have to be okay with the fact that I'm not going to want to knit most of the stuff that I like, or I'm going to have to suck it up and realize that most of the stuff that is coming out is not for me. I also think the success criteria and the kind of financial ROI in summer knitting is not the same as what we would expect as compared to winter knitting. So when we look at wool sweaters, they're really expensive, especially really nice wool sweaters. Oftentimes when I'm knitting with wool, I'm knitting with 100% wool, and I know a lot of us are also knitting with 100% wool, if not 100%, you know, wool that's fancy, like merino wool or, you know, a little bit of mohair. That kind of thing commercially can be in the hundreds, right? Like easily in the hundreds. Most things that you're going to be looking at the mass market for wintertime is going to start at maybe like $100 for wool, but realistically it's going to be much, much higher than that. And that's not even really considered high-end like luxury garments, right? And then and that's if you can find something that you like. A lot of it comes down to not even being able to find that thing that you like because it's all being made with plastic garbage. So when you're knitting in the wintertime, it often can be very financially worth it from like a dupe perspective, because I can knit myself a sweater for $90 that would go for $400 in the store or something like that, right? So for me, on a very practical level, making a cardigan myself instead of going to Baba to buy a Spanish wool cardigan actually makes a lot of sense. I actually knit a Spanish wool cardigan instead of buying a Spanish wool cardigan, and the price differential was still incredibly high, even though the yarn that I bought was luxury yarn, right? And that's the kind of thing that makes a lot of sense because I'm getting something that could retail for 4 times the price of what I'm buying. And obviously labor is included, but that's kind of going to be the case regardless. When it comes to summer knitting though, you're dealing with things like cotton, linen, silk, maybe. And I just find that it's a lot easier to find those things in the summer and not for crazy prices. I recently knit a top, not even like a long sleeve sweater or anything. I knit a cotton t-shirt for $70. And to me, I felt like, damn, for $70, I could get like an actually nice like blouse. Like this is not even, you know, we're not even talking about like bottom of the barrel fast fashion prices anymore. Yes, I'm sure if you went to Zara and you spent $70, you would get a piece of garbage like blouse. But you know, if you did some digging, right, I'm sure I could find something made from cotton that actually looked comparable and maybe even a little bit nicer, because those finishes that are machine knit with those natural fibers, I think can be neater than the finishes that we can achieve with yarn, you know, that we knit at home, because like it's just really hard to like weave those ends in and get everything super crispy and clean. Maybe it's a, you know, a skill issue. For sure it's a skill issue, but I just feel like the commercial element to it is just a little bit less compelling to me. T-shirts are just really expensive to knit, and I made a post, or I mentioned in my previous video, like, hey, why the hell is it so expensive to buy cotton yarn when you can get like cotton dish scrubbies at the store for like $1.99, and then, you know, I'm looking at a skinny yarn and the skinny yarn is going for $16. Someone had mentioned it might have been the amount of water and dye processing, because it's really hard to dye plant fibers, and, you know, to that I say, well, then maybe it's just not for me. I don't know. You know, maybe I'm going to be knitting in really skinny merino yarn, but that's the other thing, is that, like, you know, commercially, if plant fibers are a little bit easier to find commercially, and I don't necessarily have to knit the handmade version if I don't want to, then, you know, why don't I just knit a skinnier version of that thing, but in a lightweight wool? So that way it still is breathable, but I'm not kind of like losing money, right? Like, okay, if it's more expensive than it's worth to knit in cotton, why don't you knit something summery, but in like a merino wool? And it's because then the needles are really small, right? Like, I don't really like the feeling of having to knit something for like 6 weeks and having it just be like a little t-shirt. Maybe I'm not mature enough, and like in a couple years I will come back and I will say fingering weight knitting is all I want to do. But for now, I hate knitting on skinny needles. I don't like anything smaller than, like, I will go down to 3.5, but anything smaller than that is like straight up misery. Like, it's just so little. It's so little. It takes forever. I just feel like at that point I'm knitting with thread, and so this is a personal thing, but like all the beautiful commercial summer products that I like are kind of fussy and tiny, and like, not that there's no commercial ROI, but now there's like a craft, like no return on investment. Like, the process is now so grueling and frustrating and requires so much effort that now the endurance required to like do the thing is not worth the time, and I would rather spend my hobby time doing something else. So because my style is not minimal in the summer, and I'm always kind of like measuring up my DIY ability compared to like shopping, it just doesn't make sense for me to like see summer knitting as cost effective in the same way that I see winter knitting as cost effective, right? Like, if I want to participate in a trend in the wintertime, I'm thinking, how can I knit that trend? How can I distill all the like stuff that fast fashion is trying to tell me, that like big fashion is trying to tell me to, you know, buy into a couple of core things that I really want to participate in, whether it's color, silhouette, design, motif, whatever. I have to be really judicious in the fall, and I like that creative process of distilling and distilling and distilling, and then finding my own way to not only participate but do it in a way that is like affordable, and I feel like I'm getting, you know, to get my like foot in the door, but without, you know, spending the amount of money because my labor is worthless, right? But in the summertime, I'm realizing that it's actually not financially wise of me to do that. I might still want to distill and think about what I want and chew on it and everything, but unless something is really compelling, the financial aspect of like saving money is not there. Also because, again, see the point from before, summer fibers just tend to wear out faster. Like, I'm seeing a lot of people say that their tank tops and t-shirts and whatever just don't stay as pristine for as long because, you know, they just lose their shape, they sag, they don't have memory. It's just like kind of a losing battle. To me, it sounds like it's a losing battle. And that's another thing that I kind of have to, you know, draw the underline and be like, you know what, it is what it is. Summer knitting will never be winter knitting. The problem is not that summer knitting is just not fun, or that it's too hot to knit in the summer, or that, you know, like whatever the simple solutions are that I thought they were, it actually ended up being a lot more layered than that. And, you know, unpacking this was really interesting. Hopefully this gave you guys a little bit of pause and maybe like not comparing yourself to everyone else if like summer knitting is a time that you get really down on yourself around, you know, maybe not being as productive as other people. The good news is I do think on Knitting YouTube, we're kind of honest enough to be real with each other. And if we're not knitting that much, we just say, I'm not knitting as much, blah, 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 blah. And I wanted to be, you know, for real and honest about that as well, because I definitely have feelings around like wanting to do everything but knit in the summer. And, you know, again, for the longest time, I thought it was because, you know, it's hot and I don't want to knit because it's hot. But yeah, after dissecting a little bit further, I realized it's not that simple. It's not just that it's hot and therefore I don't want to knit. It's all the above. So don't feel too down on yourself. Remember that knitting is here to serve you as a hobby, and it's not a thing for you to like cross off your list because you have to knit. And if you find that you are not being included in what's being put out in the knitting world, or you just don't feel like you're being represented, or you don't see stuff that you like, then get on the internet and complain about it, because that's what I'm doing, and it's feeling much more clear and cathartic already. Hopefully I can cast on and finish some of my summer items before, I have to put everything away for fall, but a girl can only dream. The weather this week is actually really temperate and lovely, so I can only hope that it continues and that we don't actually need really, really lightweight stuff for too long. But with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye!